So understanding that people buy products to solve problems, there's this process that we go through, and this is one of those things that has been widely understood in a lot of circumstances, and it seems to be valid in a lot of situations. And again, this process, please don't walk in front of the camera, thank you. This process involves not just products, but really any way that we as human beings solve a problem that we perceive. So I'm going to talk about what it is, get into this concept of limited versus extensive problem solving, and then actually talk about the process in mind-numbing depth. So, consumer buying process, by the way, this is great multiple choice test type stuff. A 5-stage process people go through when they're making decisions. You have a problem recognition, and then you identify the alternatives, you evaluate the alternatives, you make your decision, and then based on the decision, you have some feelings, experience with the product after you've made the purchase, and that all feeds back into, we talked earlier about transactions are not unrelated to each other. That feeds back into what you understand about the world. You have to take them in order. Okay. You can't solve a problem until you know that a problem exists. And you can't choose an alternative until you've identified what the alternatives are. You can't make a decision unless you have identified what the alternatives are. And you can't have experience with the product if you don't buy it. But you have to take them in order, but you don't have to do every step in the process. And we'll talk about this idea of high involvement and low involvement. There may be situations where I identify the problem, I know what the solution is, I just buy it. I don't go through all that thinking, and we'll talk about why. And you can drop out of the process every time. Not every time, but you can drop out of the process at any time. So just because I recognize I have a problem doesn't mean that's going to lead to a solution, that's going to lead to a purchase. So I feel hungry right now. Does that mean I'm going to run out and get some food? No, it's January. Everybody's on a diet, right? I'm going to go out and get some low-carb, low-cal, high-fiber pill that will amazingly make me lose 150 pounds. And if you have that, you can force it down my throat. I will gladly buy it. So whether or not we go through the entire process or whether or not we spend a lot of time depends on how much effort we want to put into it. There's a couple of terms I want to get into, this concept of cognitive miserliness. I just love that term, cognitive misers, and involvement. So we talked about people are not rational because the decision making is influenced by emotion, by cognition, and by perception. One of the ways that people are biased in their decision making, is that we are cognitive misers, meaning we do the least amount of thinking possible in order to solve a problem. Okay, and that sounds kind of bad, doesn't it? It doesn't say much for the human race if we do the least amount of possible work to solve a problem, although as students we totally understand that. And the reason is because we have to. There's so much input in the world around us that if we paid attention to everything in the world around us, we wouldn't be able to get anything done. In fact, that's one symptom of certain types of mental illness is the inability to filter stimuli from the world and responding to everything. So as a result, because there's so much going on and we have only so much limited brain capacity, as a survival mechanism, we only focus our brain capacity, our cognitive resources, on something that's important, and once we have dealt with the problem, we move on. So the consequence is that rather than going for the best solution, which we would have predicted under the rational man theory in microeconomics, we go for the first acceptable solution. And that has big implications for how people respond to what we're trying to do to get them to buy what we want them to buy. Let me give you an example. Has anybody here ever done a research paper? And part of the criteria for the research paper is you had to use at least 3 sources. That ever happened to you? Okay. So what'd you do? You Googled the topic, and you counted 1, 2, 3, right? 3 sources, First acceptable solution, problem solved. Was that the best paper that you could have written? Apologize. But that was the first acceptable solution, so you went with it because it got the job done. Same thing with everything that we do as human beings. Rather than going through everything possible solutions, we just do enough thinking till we get the first workable solution and we go with that. There needs to be a reason for us to go beyond the minimum effort, and that's what we talk about involvement. So limited problem solving is where we just make the minimal effort. And sometimes this is called automatic purchasing. This is also why brands are so powerful. So for example, I'm at the grocery store, I'm at the checkout, I'm in the mood for a pack of gum. Do I go, do I need gum? Well, what are the choices available to me there? There's an entire rack of gum. Let me see. Do I want a big pack? Do I want a small pack? I think I've narrowed it between Wrigley's and Orbit. And after carefully weighing the consideration, I think I'm going to go with the Orbit. Or do you just go gum, want gum, got gum, put gum on thing, buy gum. I want my brand, whatever. So you don't even think about it. It's just, I want gum, done. Extensive problem solving is where you go through all of the steps. I really need to think about each one. And kind of the thing that drives whether or not we go for extensive or limited problem solving is the idea of involvement. And involvement is sometimes called ego involvement. That's a psychological principle. That relates with how much the decision is personally relevant to you. Usually this is considered to be a function of risk. So how involved I am in the process depends on how much is at stake, and the kinds of risks that we have are physical risks. Could I be killed by, or the medical treatment is, what are the side effects? It may cure my headache, but then my arm's going to fall off. There's trade-offs. There's financial risk. How much does it cost relative to how much I can afford? And I don't care who you are. Nobody has too much money. Anybody here overpaid on their job? I bet you if I asked your bosses, I'd get a different answer. And then the last one, social risk, the fear of embarrassment. And we talked before, that is a very powerful motivator. So when involvement is high, when there's a lot of risk involved, you're going to go through all of the stages of the process, and you're going to probably put in a lot of effort at each stage. When involvement is low, who cares? It's that pack of gum. So if I don't like it, I'm out a quarter. Ooh. And very few people have ever died from chewing gum. Walking and chewing gum, now that's a different story. So let's talk about two different purchases. On one side, I don't know my left from my right, which is good because it's facing this way anyway. On one side, I have a car. On the other side, I have a candy bar. For the candy bar, is there any physical risk? Yes. You could gain weight, your cholesterol could go up, and you could spoil your dinner. You could diabetic. So there's huge physical risk. Not really, okay. Is there financial risk? What's a candy bar cost? $1.50 if you're paying retail? Yeah, oh boy, you got to take out a loan to finance that candy bar. And is there social risk? Does anybody ever judged you by the candy bar that you eat? Oh my God, he's eating Hershey's. Look at, with nuts. Okay, so very low risk with a candy bar, and again, many times that's automatic purchasing. Don't even think about it. I've got a favorite candy bar, buy it, done. How about a car? Is there physical risk associated with a car? Oh yeah, you get killed in one of those babies if you drive them. Is there financial risk associated with a car? Yeah, they're very expensive. Some of them cost over $10,000, and even more if it's new, right? And then is there social risk associated with a car? Absolutely, social risk is. I've read. Some of the I don't know if anybody read any of like the Millionaire Next Door books, but when they talk about the difference between the truly rich and the nouveau rich, is The newly rich buy really expensive cars because people can see that they can afford really expensive cars. The truly rich don't necessarily buy expensive cars, but you should see their houses, because houses don't depreciate. But again, so cars, yeah, is a lot of what you buy in a car is way beyond transportation, way beyond physical. So candy bar, low involvement, probably an automatic purchase. Car, I might think a long time before I enter the process. And if I'm anybody bought a car recently? Did you spend a lot of time thinking about whether I need a car? Which car do I want? Yeah, nod. I don't know how many candy bars I went through while I was thinking about that car. Almost got diabetes.